What's up, guys? It's Alec Torelli. Welcome back to the Hand of the Day. Special episode, throwing this in before my flight to Phuket. I'm leaving in a couple hours, so I apologize. I'm wearing the same shirt in the same spot, but it's one of those weeks. I got to get action in.
Hand of the Day.
And so, let's see. We get to it. One of my readers, Bologna, I think. I might be butchering his name, but his online name is Alien Rosu. Sends me a hand from 5 cent, 10 cent. No limit hold'em 6 max cash game online. So he decides to raise 25 cents mid position. Hand kicks off here. I like the 2.5x open. He actually, I think he messaged me on Snapchat or something or somewhere. And I told him raise 2.5x instead of like 3.5x. So well done. I think it's a much better raise size, especially with 100 big blind poker, especially online. It accomplishes the same amount as raising bigger, but gives you a better price, allows you to play more hands. So I like this raise size. Well done. He gets a call from mid position. And the small blind calls as well. We go 3 ways to the flop. Flop comes King 5-3 Rainbow, great flop for us. And small blind checks, we have a very clear c-bet here. We're c-betting with ace king, but we're also going to be c-betting with a lot of other hands that are weaker, representing a strong hand like king, queen, ace, king, set of kings, set of or aces, etc. So this is definitely a reasonable spot to c-bet. With a lot of our range is much stronger than the other 2 players, so I love this c-bet for a myriad of reasons. We decided to bet half the pot, which I think is reasonable on a very dry textured board like this, where there's no flush draw, and there's very few straight draws that our opponents are going to have as well. So I like a small c-bet size. This allows us to bet smaller and more frequently when we have bluffs. Something like 9-10 suited gives us a better price on our bluffs when we balance that out by betting small with strong hands like ace-king. Interesting situation happens when mid-position calls and the small blind calls. So interesting spot, we go 3 ways to the turn. Turn is where things pick up. The turn is a king bringing a flush draw, and it's really interesting to note in this spot to take a step back and realize we have the ace of clubs. So we make it pretty much impossible that someone turned a backdoor flush draw unless they have a pair and a flush draw, or they were floating with something like 7-6 of clubs. So there's definitely fewer ace-high flush draws. There's no ace-high flush draws that other people can have, and that's some of the floating range that our opponents can have. So they could call the flop with something like ace-queen of clubs, ace-jack of clubs, ace-10 of clubs, ace-4 of clubs, ace-deuce of clubs, but none of those hands are possible because we have the ace of clubs. So that's going to come into play on the river, where it's less likely that our opponents have bluffs because we block that ace of clubs. So keep that in mind, and blockers are an important thing to understand and take into account in poker because they affect the likely possible holdings that your opponents have. Small blind checks the turn, and now we get really creative here and decide to check. I'm actually okay with this check. There's not that many cards on the river that can help our opponents improve to beat us. Maybe something like 2 7s gets a free card and they have a chance to hit 2 outs, but that's like a 22-to-1 shot. Pretty unlikely that they're going to improve, and I'm okay with checking here. I'm also okay with checking because so often when it goes bet, call, call on this flop, and the turn comes a king, we're going to be checking most of our range here because most of our range here is weak. We're going to be even checking something like aces or queens or air for pot control and to give up. So I like checking with strong hands once in a while like ace-king because it really mixes up your game and makes you more deceptive, and it confuses your opponents to thinking that your hand is under-repped, meaning it looks like you have a weaker hand than you do, and that's another way to make more money. If you do bet this turn after getting called twice, it's very hard for you to be bluffing, number 1, and number 2, your opponents think you have something like what you do have, because it's so likely they have a king, one of them has a king, that you really can't profit by bluffing, so your range has to be pretty strong. So I like making your range look weaker and checking. I'm okay with that play. Well done, you mixed it up, that's kind of badass. And now the button bets. Button bets $1, which is half the pot. Small blind calls $1, and at this point, I'm going to continue with the same strategy. I'm going to make my range look weak. If you raise here, it looks even stronger than if you had bet, because now you're back raising after there's a bet on the turn and a call when the king comes. That would be crazy. So I'm okay with just calling here and make your hand look weak. You could have, like, maybe you could have ace-high flush draw, getting a really good price, like ace-4 of clubs, calling the turn with a flush draw and a straight draw, getting a good price. That's possible. Maybe you have a 6-7 of clubs. Maybe you have pocket queens and you're just like pot control, don't know where you're at. You're calling the turn, getting a good price as well. So I'm okay with calling the turn here. I think it makes your hand look weaker. And we go 3 ways to the river. River comes in offsuit 9. Small blind checks. And now we have an interesting spot. Like, we could opt to bet here and try and get value from a worse king. And it's really unlikely our opponents are going to bluff raise us or raise us with a worse hand because our line looks so strong. We could have some boats. We could have 9s full. We could have quads. We could have something like king 9. So it's really unlikely we're going to get raised off of our hand, and it is possible we get called by a worse hand. That is definitely possible. We could be bluffing, or we could just be doing something stupid, and sometimes it's smaller stakes, especially people like to call more often. And if you think that the button's not going to bet something like king 10 or king jack even, because it's very threatening going 3 ways to this river, betting is a reasonable strategy, and it's okay to do some of the time as well. I'm actually okay with betting like 250 or whatever on this river as well. You also get value from the small blind, who's very likely he has something like king, and since he can't bet because it's already checked to him, it's already checked to you, the only option is for you to really bet. And it's also, the other reason I like betting is it's unlikely the button is going to bet as like a stone bluff, given that he got called twice on the turn and such a threatening board. So I'm okay with betting. I'm also okay with checking, because maybe the button bets too light, maybe he bluffs, maybe you keep some bluffs in there. Your hand also looks weaker, and so I'm okay with both. I think both have merit, and I'm okay with both. You decide to check. The button now bets 275, and now the small blind calls, and now we have a super tough decision. On the turn we were trapping, and now we're in a spot where suddenly it's like maybe they were trapping us. Our hand doesn't look as sexy as it used to, and there's actually a really good chance we're beat. So I ran this hand quite a bit through an equity calculator, and here's the bottom line. You basically have, if both of your opponents can't have kings, so you're basically hoping one of two things. You're hoping that in order for you to have the best hand, one of two things have to happen. You either have to have one of them value betting a worse king, and another one calling with a hand that's not a king. So for example, you have to have the button value bet king jack, and the small blind call with 10s, or you have to have one of them bluffing and another one calling with a king. So let's take a look a little bit and dive deeper into this river situation to figure out if that's possible and how likely it is. So the button could be bluffing. It's possible he's bluffing. Some people over bluff in spots like these. Some people want to have bluffing ranges in all these situations. It's possible that he's bluffing. And it's also possible that he's value betting worse. He could be value betting something as low as king 10 here, even though I think that hand is probably a check on the river. He could be overplaying his hand, as people do, and he value bets king jack or king queen or king 10. So I think king queen's a reasonable bet, but he definitely could be value betting all the way down to king 10, and he also could be bluffing a very small percentage of the time, maybe 5 or 10%. So from that aspect, you're good, but then you have to say, okay, if he's bluffing, then the small blind could definitely have a king. But remember, he's only bluffing like, let's say 10% of the time. It's really unlikely he's bluffing. So the small blind could have a king if that guy's bluffing, in which case your hand is good. But if the guy has a king on the river, which is more likely than the fact that he's bluffing, then you're saying, well, what the hell does the small blind call with you behind him? So you're hoping that the small blind has something like 10s or like 7s and just making a crazy call. So it's kind of an awkward spot because the small blind, it's really hard for him to call with a worse hand than a king on this river, but it's also really hard for him to call with a better hand than ace king. It's really hard for him to have you beat, but at the same time, it's unlikely that this guy's bluffing and this guy has a king. It's much more likely that this guy has a boat and the small blind has a king. The problem is that that's the most likely scenario. So it's a really tough spot for you. You're getting 20%. You need 20% equity to justify calling because the pot is so big. You only need to be right 1 in 5 times. But you're basically hoping that the button's either value betting a worse hand or a bluff, and that the small blind is calling with a worse hand or a king. It's important to note that it's very unlikely, almost impossible, that the small blind has you beat. And that's the best case you have going for you, because if the small blind had you beat with something like 9s full, kings 9, 5s, or 3s, he probably would have either raised the flop, raised the turn, or raised the river. So it's very unlikely he has you beat. So that's the good news, is that your equity against his hand is very high. The question is, how is your equity doing against the button when the small blind's range is most likely a king? So in this spot, without any information, because of the price I'm getting, I would probably call here. My hand's a little bit under-repped, and I know that people have the tendency to overplay their hands. Sometimes people bluff in spots they shouldn't. I'm probably going to call in a micro-stakes game online like this. If I'm playing a high-stakes game where people are very good at hand reading and people play their hands in a different way and they don't overvalue their hands, or I'm playing live poker and I'm more sure about the situation because of a read I have, I could end up making a big fold in this spot. But the main key, I think, for calling here is just the price you're getting. If they bet bigger or you were getting a worse price, I would definitely say you could fold because your hand's probably not good that often. But when you only need to be right 20% of the time to break even, it's like, it's so friggin' hard to fold, right? So you end up folding the river, which is pretty incredible. It's amazing fold, super disciplined, regardless of whether you're right or not. Just to have the capability as a player to fold there is pretty awesome. And the button shows fives and the small blind mucks. So it's really, you know, the button definitely had it. The small blind, like I said, very unlikely he has you beat. He probably had like a king X type hand, and you made an incredible fold, man. Very well done. At the micros, you're gonna definitely move up playing this level of poker. So well done and congrats. I hope you liked this video. Subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Leave me a comment below, let me know your thoughts. And that's it. It's getting dark. I gotta run. I'm on a flight, so I'll see you guys in Thailand. And thanks for watching my YouTube. Cheers, buddy.